we were embracing each other over the phone about a dearly beloved friend, because Malcolm's mother was also his manager.
When the news broke that Malcolm-Jamal Warner had died at the age of 54, hearts around the world shattered. The details at first were devastating in their simplicity. He had been in Costa Rica on a rare vacation with his wife and their 8-year-old daughter, far from the public spotlight he guarded so fiercely. During what should have been a peaceful swim in the crystalline Pacific waters, something went terribly wrong. Strong currents dragged him beneath the surface. Surfers nearby attempted a rescue, but when they reached him, it was too late. His body was recovered about 20 minutes later. CPR was attempted, but the sea had already taken him. As news of his passing spread, tributes flooded social media. Fans, colleagues, and longtime admirers mourned the boy who grew into Theo Huxtable, then into a deeply respected poet, musician, and artist. The world remembered him with fondness, but the one voice that remained silent was his mother's, Pamela Warner. Until now, after days of silence, Pamela finally spoke, revealing not just the heartbreaking details of her son's final day, but also secrets she had held close. His last words to her, his deepest fears, and the request he made that she never speak of unless he failed to return. What she shared has left even those closest to Malcolm in stunned silence. This is not your average celebrity farewell. This is a mother's truth. Why did Malcolm hide his marriage and child from the public eye for so many years? Why did Pamela say she knew he would die that day before it even happened? And what haunting thing did she mention about the ocean that left those listening utterly speechless? The story she tells doesn't just fill in the blanks. It changes everything you thought you knew. Malcolm-Jamal Warner was born on August 18, 1970, in Jersey City, New Jersey. Raised solely by his mother after she separated from his father, Pamela chose his name with intention, drawing from cultural icons like Malcolm X and jazz pianist Ahmad Jamal to imbue him with a sense of pride and power. Their journey together was one of perseverance. She relocated them to Los Angeles when Malcolm was still young, nurturing his budding passion for the arts despite working multiple jobs. By the age of 9, Malcolm was already acting, with Pamela not just as his mother, but as his manager. When he auditioned for The Cosby Show at the age of 13, his was the final audition of the day. He walked in with no formal training and no agent, yet he captured the producer's attention. He didn't perform, he simply became Theo. The very next day, they called Pamela to say he had gotten the role. She screamed so loudly that the neighbors thought someone had died. In a way, she later reflected, someone did, my little boy. That moment marked the beginning of his life in the spotlight, and the beginning of her letting him go. The Cosby Show was an immediate cultural phenomenon, and Malcolm became a household name. His charm, comedic timing, and sincerity won hearts, but Pamela kept him grounded. She insisted he stay in school, accompanied him to every taping, and turned down offers she didn't feel were right. Behind the scenes, she was his constant, his protector, his guide, his lighthouse. But fame cast long shadows. Pamela watched how quickly people began to treat him differently. The same kids who once ignored him now clamored to be his friend. Adults who had overlooked her now spoke with false reverence. And all the while, Malcolm remained her son, taking out the trash, asking if she wanted tea, and giving her a kiss on the cheek when he came home. To the world, he was Theo. To Pamela, he was just Malcolm. And while success brought admiration, it also brought scrutiny. Pamela feared what fame might do to his soul. He was still discovering who he was, even as millions of people claimed to know him. The pressure grew. Directors demanded charm and perfection. Reporters dug into his personal life. Pamela noticed the toll it took. He would often come home and sit in silence for hours. He turned inward, turning to poetry, jazz, and deep questions about race, identity, masculinity, and truth. Sometimes I feel like everyone sees me, but no one knows me, he once told her, and that frightened her deeply. She got him therapy. She pulled him out of certain projects, She gave him the space to grow away from the spotlight. And through it all, Malcolm stayed humble. He respected everyone on set, spoke with intention, and called his mother every day, no matter where he was filming. "If I ever die without saying I love you," he once told her, "just remember I said it every day." She did, and she always would. When The Cosby Show ended in 1992, it was a turning point. The cameras stopped rolling, and Pamela watched her son stand at the threshold of adulthood under an unbearable weight. Many child stars lose themselves once the fame fades, but not Malcolm. He had an old soul and a fierce determination to reclaim his narrative. He wasn't interested in living as Theo forever. "I want to show them who I really am," he told Pamela. "I want to create, not just perform." And he did just that. He began performing spoken word poetry at local venues, often under the radar. Pamela would sit in the back of the audience, unnoticed, as he shared verses about love, identity, pain, and joy. He also poured himself into music, mastering the bass guitar and forming his own band. His work wasn't chart-topping. It wasn't meant to be. It was heartfelt, complex, and full of soul. Pamela played his records at family gatherings and kept a framed vinyl of his debut album on her mantle. He had nothing to prove, she said, only something to share. He also moved behind the camera, directing television episodes and producing thoughtful content that elevated overlooked voices. He wasn't chasing stardom, he was chasing substance. Still, there was one part of his life he guarded fiercely, his personal world. While fans speculated, Pamela remained one of the only people who knew the truth. Malcolm had quietly married a woman he loved, someone he deliberately kept out of the spotlight. Her identity was never made public, and Malcolm intended it to stay that way. He wasn't hiding her out of shame, but out of protection. He didn't want the world picking apart his love story. Their daughter, born 8 years ago, became the center of his life. Pamela recalled the moment he told her she would be a grandmother. His voice trembled, not out of fear but from overwhelming joy. "You're going to be a grandma," he said, his tone warm with laughter. That night, Pamela cried, not from worry, but from knowing that her son was stepping into the greatest role of all, fatherhood. She watched him raise his daughter with gentle strength, read her stories, play bass guitar for her, and teach her to create with love. He didn't just raise her, Pamela said. He cherished her. They were a close-knit family, celebrating holidays, making memories, and living quietly together. Those memories, those beautiful, ordinary moments, are now what haunt Pamela most. In the days following Malcolm-Jamal Warner's tragic death, Pamela Warner found herself suspended between unbearable grief and the crushing responsibility of honoring her son's final wishes. There had always been a sense of spiritual connection between Malcolm and his mother, something that went deeper than their mother-son bond. It was almost like they shared a rhythm, a quiet telepathy. Pamela used to say that she felt her son's emotions before he ever said a word, and Malcolm often joked that she could read his soul. So when she picked up the phone on the morning of his final day alive and heard his voice, there was something in his tone that stopped her cold. He was eerily calm, more peaceful than usual, but there was something behind his words, something that felt like closure. "I'm standing at the edge of the water," he told her. "It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. I just needed to tell you that." That was all he said. It wasn't unusual for Malcolm to speak in poetic fragments, but this time Pamela felt a chill. She wanted to ask more, to probe, to keep him on the line, but something told her not to. Later, she would replay that call in her head over and over, analyzing every pause, every breath, every word. That was the last time she heard his voice. When the call came in later that afternoon, confirming his death, Pamela didn't cry right away. She felt as if the world had gone silent, as though the noise of reality had been sucked out of the air. The ocean had taken her son, the same ocean he had described as beautiful. For days, she sat in her home, surrounded by Malcolm's artwork, music, and photos, struggling to process not just the loss, but the enormity of what had been left unsaid. And then, 3 days after his passing, she opened a letter, Malcolm had given it to her months earlier, sealed in an envelope marked simply, "Only open if I don't return." At the time, she thought it was related to a minor surgery he had undergone, or perhaps a formality for his will. She hadn't given it much thought, but now, trembling, she broke the seal. The letter was handwritten, 5 pages long, and it was not just a goodbye. It was a message filled with love, regret, confession, and instruction. Malcolm began by assuring her that he was at peace. "If you are reading this," he wrote, "I want you to know that I left with love in my heart and gratitude for everything you gave me." He then spoke of his daughter, how he wished he had more time, how he hoped she would grow up remembering the sound of his voice and the warmth of his embrace. He asked Pamela to tell her stories, to play his music for her, to keep his poetry alive in her world. Then came the part that Pamela had not expected. Malcolm spoke directly about his pain, not just emotional pain, but a deep spiritual exhaustion. "I've spent my whole life trying to be seen," he wrote, "but I'm still not sure if the world ever really looked at me. They saw Theo, they saw the character, but they didn't see the man." He described years of fighting against the mold the industry tried to trap him in. He talked about the scripts he turned down because they perpetuated stereotypes, the roles he lost because he asked too many questions, the music that went unheard because it didn't fit into a genre they could market. "I got tired," he admitted, "not of life but of pretending, of pushing, of performing for a world that doesn't want to grow." Yet he never stopped loving his craft. In the same letter, he expressed how proud he was of his journey. The poetry readings in hidden cafes, the independent films made with friends, the community projects he quietly funded, the conversations he had with young black men about identity and healing. "That's the work I want to be remembered for," he wrote. "Not just the laughs I gave them, but the questions I asked." He also spoke about his decision to keep his wife and daughter out of the public eye. "It wasn't about shame," he clarified. "It was about protection. This world has a way of turning love into spectacle, and I couldn't bear to see their joy dissected." He described his wife as his sanctuary and their daughter as his rebirth. "Everything I couldn't fix in myself," he wrote, "I tried to build in her. I hope she knows that even when I was tired, I never stopped trying." Near the end of the letter, Malcolm left specific instructions for Pamela. He asked her not to release any photos of his daughter. He requested that his funeral be small, private, and free from press. And he asked that, if she ever spoke publicly about him, she do so with honesty, not heroism. "Tell them I was flawed," he said. "Tell them I got angry. Tell them I doubted myself. But also tell them I loved deeply, created fiercely, and tried to leave this world better than I found it." He signed the letter simply, "Your son always." Reading that letter broke Pamela open in a way she hadn't known was possible. It was like hearing his voice again, soft but resolute. In the days that followed, she began speaking to those closest to him, his wife, his bandmates, his writing partners. She learned things she hadn't even known. The anonymous donations he made to arts programs, the nights he stayed up mentoring young screenwriters, the letters he wrote to incarcerated fans who said his work had helped them survive. Bit by bit, a fuller picture of Malcolm emerged, one that went far beyond Theo, far beyond Hollywood. He had lived a life of purpose, even when no one was watching. Pamela began writing down his stories, compiling his poetry, and archiving his unreleased music. She made it her mission not just to mourn him, but to carry his truth forward. She also began preparing to speak publicly, not in a press conference or morning show appearance, but in a recorded message she would release quietly, on her own terms. In the message, she read from Malcolm's letter, her voice trembling but strong. She spoke of his last swim, his private grief, his quiet victories. She ended the video with his favorite quote, one he had scribbled on dozens of notebooks: "Even the stars burn out, but while they shine, they give light." The video went viral, not because it was sensational, but because it was real. Viewers around the world finally saw Malcolm not as a nostalgic figure frozen in time, but as a man who had lived, loved, struggled, and shone. Pamela, once determined to stay silent, had become his final messenger. And in doing so, she gave him the one thing he had always wanted to be fully seen. In the weeks that followed Malcolm-Jamal Warner's passing and the release of Pamela Warner's emotional message, something began to shift, not just in public perception, but in the deeper cultural conversation surrounding Malcolm's life and legacy. What had initially seemed like another tragic celebrity death started to reveal itself as a much bigger story, one that demanded reflection not just from fans, but from the very industry that had spent decades simultaneously celebrating and sidelining him. Pamela found herself inundated with letters, emails, and messages from strangers across the world. Some were fans who had grown up watching The Cosby Show. Others were artists who had quietly drawn inspiration from Malcolm's lesser-known work in poetry and music. One particularly moving letter came from a young teacher in Chicago who shared how a Malcolm monologue from an indie film he'd starred in had sparked a classroom discussion on fatherhood and identity. Another came from a man who had been incarcerated for over a decade and credited Malcolm's spoken word album for helping him find the courage to pursue poetry while inside. Stories like these poured in daily, reminding Pamela that her son's life had quietly planted seeds in places far beyond the spotlight. Meanwhile, Hollywood struggled with its own conscience. A few industry voices issued statements, but many stayed silent, perhaps out of discomfort or shame. After all, Malcolm had been speaking about systemic erasure and creative invisibility long before it became fashionable. He had questioned the industry's treatment of black men long before anyone was listening. Now in death, his words echoed louder than ever. A major entertainment magazine released a posthumous profile, calling him the artist we should have seen sooner. Pamela read it with mixed feelings. It was beautifully written, but it stung. Because the truth was, Malcolm had always been there writing, performing, evolving. The world just hadn't looked closely enough. Still, she appreciated the effort and hoped it would open doors for others like him. Around this time, Pamela began speaking privately with his widow, a woman still reeling from the trauma of losing both a partner and the quiet life they had so carefully protected. She had been unsure whether to step forward publicly, but after watching Pamela's video and seeing the outpouring of love, she decided to release a written statement. In it, she described Malcolm not as a celebrity, but as a deeply present father and a thoughtful partner who never let the weight of fame change the way he showed up for his family. She spoke of their daughter's love for bedtime bass solos, of Sunday mornings spent making pancakes, of Malcolm's habit of humming when he was happy. The statement ended with a line that broke hearts. He never wanted to be famous. He just wanted to matter. That simple truth echoed across social media, prompting a new wave of tributes, think pieces, and personal reflections. Artists began to share memories of working with Malcolm, how he treated crew members with the same respect as producers, how he always remembered names, how he mentored without making it about himself. One young actor shared that Malcolm had pulled him aside after a table read and said, "You don't have to be loud to be heard. Let your work speak." That line, too, began trending. In the midst of all this, Pamela made a decision. She would organize a celebration, not a funeral, not a tribute show, but a living archive of Malcolm's work, influence, and heart. She called it "The Light That Stayed," a phrase Malcolm had once written in a poem about resilience. The event would feature his music, his poetry, clips from his directorial work, and letters from those he had touched. It wouldn't be televised, but it would be recorded and released in full, unedited, on a platform he had once hoped to build himself. When the night came, the small theater in downtown Los Angeles was filled with artists, family, and longtime collaborators. The walls were lined with photographs never before seen by the public. Malcolm playing guitar for his daughter, reading quietly in his home library, laughing at a barbecue with friends. On stage, musicians performed unreleased tracks from his final recording sessions. Actors read his poetry aloud. A choir sang a rendition of one of his favorite jazz pieces. And near the end of the night, Pamela stepped on stage. Dressed in a simple black suit with a pendant Malcolm had given her years ago, she took a deep breath and said, "My son lived quietly but felt everything loudly." She shared excerpts from his journals, passages about fatherhood, about the ache of being misunderstood, about the freedom he found in creating without needing approval. "He once told me," she said, "the goal isn't to be seen, the goal is to be felt. If they feel me, I'll never be gone." The room sat in silence. No one clapped, not immediately. It was the kind of silence Malcolm would have appreciated. Heavy, respectful, full of meaning. Pamela then closed with his final wish: carry the work forward. And so they did. In the months that followed, a collection of Malcolm's poetry was published. His unfinished documentary on Black fatherhood was completed with the help of his closest collaborators. A scholarship fund was launched in his name, supporting young artists from underrepresented communities. And perhaps most meaningfully, conversations around creative erasure, artistic protection, and emotional safety for Black men in entertainment began gaining renewed attention, this time with Malcolm's name at the center. Pamela continued to lead these efforts quietly, never making it about herself. Her only goal was to honor the fullness of her son's life. And every time she missed him, which was every single day, she would listen to his voice on an old voicemail he had left after a routine check-in. "Hey Ma, just wanted to say I love you. Don't forget to water the plants, and if you're ever feeling low, remember, every part of me came from you." She had that voicemail saved in 3 different places. She played it often, sometimes with tears, sometimes with a smile, because Malcolm wasn't just her son. He was her greatest teacher, and though the world had taken its time to see him, now it finally did. Fully, completely, beautifully.